Oh, there's something in my chest that I can't hide. When feelings get involved, I'm terrified. 'Cause I've been here before and said goodbye. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? For you, I'd give it one more try. Turn away and wrestle with my doubts. Oh, I leave them all behind, but don't know how. Bury my head deep within the crowd, but I'm reaching for your hand to pull me out. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times?
Okay, good evening. How are we all? Hope we're all good. I'm good. I got on stream and it says it's my affiliate anniversary. I knew I was getting close, but I didn't know it was today. So, cool. 1 year as an affiliate. Um, and I actually got my first payout a month or so ago. So I'm technically a paid streamer now. Woo-hoo. All right, so that's all the celebration I have in me. All right. It is Star Wars reading night. So we're going to do two more chapters from Revan. And then we're going to play some Greedfall in the next session. So here we go. Chapter 14. Candace continued to stare at the cavern wall while Revan stood by in respective silence. Eventually, he turned back to Revan and said, "We shouldn't just leave them lying here like this. It's disrespectful." Revan nodded. The Mandalorians still lay where they had fallen, their bodies crumpled in unnatural positions. Together the two men gathered them up one by one and laid them down side by side in the center of the room. As he had done with Vila, Candace closed their eyes and crossed their hands over their chests. If there had been any way to make a funeral pyre, Revan would have suggested they burn them in the Mandalorian custom, but with no fuel that wasn't going to be possible. What am I going to tell the others? Candace wondered, once they were done arranging the bodies. Revan understood his dilemma. There would be a lot of questions when they returned alone with Mandalorian's mask, and Candace didn't want to bring shame onto Vila's name. Keep it simple, Revan suggested. Say we ran into unexpected resistance from Guardian droids, programmed to protect the crypt. Tell them Vila and the others died in battle, and they fought like true warriors before they fell. Canderous nodded, then slowly walked over to the sarcophagus. He took out Mandalore's mask, then, almost as an afterthought, picked up the Datacron. "What's this?" he asked, looking curiously at the small cube. "It's a chronicle of the Sith Lord who was buried here," Revan said. "I think Malak and I found it hidden in the tomb the last time we were here." "Do you remember what's on it?" "Mostly." "Tell me." Revan knew Canderous was hoping there would be something in the history that would help him understand why Vila had turned on him. From what Revan remembered of the story, it would offer little solace, but he wasn't about to deny the request. His name was Dramath II, or Lord Dramath II. 1,000 years ago, his father, the original Lord Dramath, ruled over a planet called Madrius. It was overthrown by another Sith named Lord Vidiate, who renamed the planet Nathema. With his father's death, the younger Lord Dramath fled. He hid on Rekiad with a handful of loyal followers, and when he died, they buried him here with the Datacron. "So it has nothing to do with Mandalore or his mask?" Canderous asked, shaking his head. "You just decided to hide it here too?" Revan hesitated for a moment. "Actually, it has everything to do with Mandalore," he said finally. Canderous had a right to know the truth, but first Revan had to put all the pieces back together for himself. Coming to the underground burial chamber had triggered the return of a host of lost memories. They had come to him in disconnected scraps and momentary flashes of insight. He needed time to process the information, to sort it into something that made some kind of sense. "Can we talk about this later?" was all he said. Canderous studied Revan's face, seemed about to say something, but then nodded. "Let's get some rest," he suggested. "We can make it back down the mountain tonight. We can't make it back down the mountain tonight, anyway. We can talk in the morning." Spending the night exposed on the plateau's surface wasn't an option, not while they could stay underground in a geothermally heated cavern that was sheltered from the elements. They unrolled their sleeping bags near the edge of the chamber, as far away from Vila and the other bodies as possible. Sharing the room with 6 corpses was unpleasant, but it was better than freezing to death. Neither man slept well. Revan could hear Canderous tossing and turning. Once Revan thought he heard him whisper Vila's name. Revan's thoughts wouldn't let him sleep either. He had hoped finding Mandalore's mask would be a breakthrough, the key to unlocking all his lost memories. But the more he tried to reassemble the fragmented images swarming in his head, the more he realized how much was still missing. He had taken only a small step forward, and he suspected the journey was far from over. When sleep finally overcame him, he dreamed about the world of endless storms and perpetual night again. It seemed more vivid than before, more substantial, more real. He couldn't say how long he slept. It was difficult to sense the passage of time in the chamber. When he woke, he didn't feel refreshed, but he knew it was pointless to try to go back to sleep. Canderous was already up, pacing slowly back and forth from one side of the chamber to the other, staring at the mask he held in his hands. Revan stood up and stretched, working the kinks out of his neck and shoulders. "I'm ready to tell you what I remember about Mandalore," he said, "if you still want to know." "I do." Taking one last breath to help gather his thoughts, Revan launched into the tale. About 2 years before he declared war on the Republic, Mandalore was approached by a man with skin the color of blood, a Sith. "I thought the Jedi wiped the Sith out." "So did the Jedi. The Sith species vanished from after the Great Hyperspace War. One of their kind hasn't been seen in Republic space in over 1,000 years. But this red-skinned being came to Mandalore. He claimed to be the emissary of a powerful master, a descendant of the Sith Lord who had driven Dramath into exile, and convinced Mandalore to help him search for his enemy's tomb." Revan was speaking slowly, the words coming out only as fast as the details came into focus. His recollections were still hazy and jumbled. The original time and place of each specific memory was unclear. Mandalore had told him some of this. Other details had come from the Datacron in the tomb. Most of it he had learned much later, after he and Malak had journeyed into the unknown regions themselves. It was impossible to sort it all out. Out of necessity, his damaged mind had collapsed his memories into one another, merging them into a semi-coherent whole as he'd slept. Mandalore helped the Sith find Drama's hidden crypt, he continued. The Sith took the remains to give it to his master. In exchange, he told Mandalore of a vision his master had had of the Mandalorians rising up against the Republic. He told him they would conquer world after world, crushing their enemies until the Republic collapsed in on itself. He promised the Mandalorians a glorious victory, and Mandalore believed him. Mandalore the Ultimate wouldn't lead us into war against the Republic just because some stranger told him we'd win, Canderous protested. It's more complicated than that. The Sith used the power of the dark side to manipulate him. Only as Mandalore lay dying at my feet was the spell finally broken, and he realized he'd been tricked. That was why he told me about this place, so I could come and see for myself. This doesn't make any sense, Canderous said. You say the Sith tricked Mandalore into attacking the Republic, but why? I don't know, Revan admitted. Maybe it was a test of your strength, or ours. Maybe the Sith are planning another invasion, and they sought to weaken the Republic. But you don't know for sure? I'm remembering more and more, but there's still so much missing. Revan paused before adding, maybe I'll find the answers on Nathema. Nathema? The hyperspace coordinates are on the Datacron. I think Malak and I went there to try to learn more. Is Nathema the world you keep dreaming about? The one covered in storms and darkness? Canderous asked. Revan closed his eyes and concentrated, summoning the image that had haunted him for so many nights. He tried to associate the vision with the name, but somehow he knew it didn't fit. No, the planet in my dreams isn't Nathema. You're sure? I can't really be sure of anything, Revan confessed, but it just doesn't feel right. I think we went there after Nathema. And when you returned, you tried to conquer the Republic, just like Mandalore. Revan shook his head. It's not the same. Mandalore was a warrior, and he had no loyalty to the Republic. Convincing him to attack was more persuasion than domination. The Sith was only telling him what he wanted to hear. He was playing off Mandalore's own hidden desires. But Malak and I were Jedi. It would take more than some persuasive words and a subtle push from the Force to turn us to the dark side. Something else happened to us out there. We found something that changed us. You don't think going to Nathema again is a little risky? Canderous asked. I have to, Revan answered. It's the only way I'll find out what happened. What if the same thing happens again? I'll be more careful this time. My guard will be up. Do you think that's going to make a difference? I hope so. So when do we leave? You're not coming, Revan said. You have to stay here with your people. He held up his hand to cut off any protests. Vila was right about one thing. You should be the leader of the Mandalorians. The mask is there, just waiting for you to claim it. You need my help, Canderous insisted. I turned my back on Vila when she needed me. I'm not going to make the same mistake with you. That's why you have to stay, Revan told him. The Mandalorians were tricked into a war that nearly destroyed them. I don't know who the Sith was or what he was after, but he knew you couldn't win. He knew a war against the Republic would leave the Mandalorians devastated. If the Sith are planning another invasion of the Republic, they'd have to come through Mandalorian space first, Canderous muttered. Maybe they were trying to get us out of the way. Maybe. Or maybe they wanted to twist your culture and beliefs and hope you'd join them. Many of the Mandalorians are bitter and hungry for revenge. Without a new Mandalore, how hard would it be for someone to manipulate them into going to war again? Revan frowned. Your people have lost their way, Canderous. You need to help them find it again. The fate of the galaxy could depend on it. Canderous stared at Revan and then down at the mask in his hands. He stood stock still for a moment, then slowly he raised the mask and slipped it over his head. "Mandalore has returned," he declared. "I am Mandalore the Preserver, and I will restore the honor and glory of my people." T3M4 greeted Revan's return to the Ebon Hawk with a shrill stream of beeps and whistles. The astromech was spinning in place so rapidly that Revan feared he might burn out a circuit. "Settle down, little fella," he said, reaching out to pat the droid. "I'm glad to see you, too." T3 stopped spinning and responded with an inquisitive chirp. "Canderous is staying here," Revan explained. "These are his people. This is where he belongs." T3 beeped twice. "No, we're not going home yet," Revan said, settling into the pilot's chair and punching in their hyperspace coordinates. "We're headed into the unknown regions to a planet called Nathema." And that's the end of chapter 14. We're going to jump right on into 15. Scourge knew that Nyrus was watching him carefully. For the past week, ever since she had told him the truth about Zedrix, he had felt her presence constantly. He had promised not to act on his knowledge until he saw Nathema for himself, and he intended to keep that promise. He knew she didn't trust him, and he knew she'd try to kill him if she felt threatened, and also that she was powerful enough to have a good chance of succeeding. But he had his own reasons for obeying. He was curious about what she had told him. He wanted to know more about the Emperor's mysterious past. And if it turned out that Nyrus was telling the truth, if the Emperor really was mad enough to start another war with the Republic, then maybe Scourge should consider taking her side. Now the day of reckoning was here. Nyrus had come for him early, waking him with a subtle whisper in his ear. "It's time." He dressed quickly, then followed her out to the spaceport, where a private shuttle was waiting for him. Unlike the rest of her fleet, this one bore neither her colors nor her crest. This journey would be conducted in utter secrecy. The shuttle was clearly built for speed. There was no armor to speak of, and at first glance it was easy to miss the single blaster turret mounted under the cockpit. Scourge was no expert on starship weaponry, but he guessed it would only be effective at close range. The interior was more functional than luxurious, with room to seat 6. On this trip... Gnat or something here. On this trip, he and Nyrus would be the only passengers. She settled into the pilot's chair, her fingers moving rapidly over the controls with a dexterity that belied her gnarled, wrinkled appearance. Neither of them spoke as the shuttle took to the sky, climbing rapidly through the clouds and lightening until it broke free of the atmosphere. Nyrus made a few more adjustments and punched in their route, and the ship jumped into hyperspace, leaving Droman Kaas and Nyrus's loyal followers behind. "Nothing I tell you can prepare you for what you will see on Nathema," Nyrus warned him. "But I will tell you the history of the Emperor and his homeworld." "How can I know you're telling the truth?" She shrugged. "Believe it or not as you see fit. If nothing else, it will help pass the time." She settled herself more comfortably, and as she spoke, her voice took on the sing-song tone of a children's storyteller. "The Emperor's name was Tenebrae," she began. "They say he was born with eyes as black as the void of empty space, and he never cried, even as an infant. No animal would come near him, and when he began to talk, his voice carried a weight and power that should not come from a child. At the age of 6, he began to manifest signs of the Force, marking him as one of the ruling elite. But his parents were simple farmers, and the Force was not strong in them. Suspicious about the boy's power, his father confronted his mother, who admitted to having an affair with the Sith Lord who ruled over them. The father flew into a rage, attacking the boy's mother. Tenebrae stopped him, feeding on the father's rage and hate to call upon the dark side. He snapped his father's neck with a mere thought, killing him instantly. His mother died more slowly. Tenebrae made her suffer for months as punishment for betraying the family, torturing her with the Force as he honed his powers. Now orphaned by his own hand, he made the others in the village bow down to him. Those who refused, he tortured and killed through the Force. Over the next few years, his reputation and influence spread to nearby villages, and he amassed legions of both fanatical and terrified followers. He killed thousands during his rise to power. Many died just to feed his insatiable appetite for suffering, tortured for days in public executions so he could savor their agonizing ends. "This sounds more like a legend than a history," Scourge remarked. "I cannot guarantee the truth of this story," Nyrus admitted. "Those who witnessed the events no longer live to verify them, but if you had ever met the Emperor in person, you would not be so hesitant to accept the tale as fact." "What about Nathima's ruler, the boy's father? You claimed he was a Sith Lord. Surely he didn't sit back doing nothing while a child conquered his people village by village." "Tenebrae's father was named Lord Dramath. He heard rumors, but they came from a remote and insignificant territory. He had long forgotten the simple commoner who had borne him a son, and he considered the plight of a few small villages beneath his notice. Had Dramath acted more swiftly, the Emperor might have been stopped, but it took almost 4 years before he decided to go see Tenebrae for himself. Lord Dramath intended to judge the child's power to determine if he was worthy of serving the Sith Lord, or if he should simply be executed. But Tenebrae had no intention of serving or of dying. When they met face to face, Tenebrae proved the stronger. Only 10 years old, he stripped his father of his power and his mind. Lord Dramath spent his last moments weeping in terror, gazing up into the black eyes of his son. It took Tenebrae 3 more years to gain control of the rest of Nathema. Dramath's firstborn son fled rather than face his formidable half-brother, but other powerful Sith sought to seize the empty throne. All fell before the dark prodigy, and with each victory he grew more powerful and more ruthless. At 13, he presented himself to Marka Ragnos, the Lord of all Sith, and the ruler of the Sith Council. Impressed by the teenager's ambition and power, Marka Ragnos granted him the title of Lord Vidiot. His position was as ruler of Nathema officially recognized. Lord Vidiot returned to his home to conduct his research into the depths of the dark side's power. He stayed there for 100 years. When Marka Ragnos fell, Lord Vidiot did not join in the mad rush to claim his position. He was not part of the great hyperspace war against the Republic. When Nagaseto and Ludo Kresh fought for leadership of the Sith, he took no side. But in the aftermath of the war, after our defeat at the hands of the Republic, and our flight to escape the massacre of our people by the Jedi, he emerged from his solitude to call a great council of all the Sith Lords who remained. He invited them to his palace on Nathema, built on the site of his childhood home, the place where he had killed his adopted father and tortured his mother to death. He invited them to participate in a ritual to unlock the full potential of the dark side. He promised they would unleash power beyond anything they had ever witnessed or imagined. Didn't they suspect a trap? Perhaps, Nyrus shrugged. Some refused to answer his call, but many more came. After all, what could one man do against 100 Sith Lords? Remember, he was not the Emperor back then. He was merely Lord Vidiot, ruler of a single planet of no particular importance. He hadn't fought in any battles of note, or achieved any great victories or conquests beyond his homeworld. He had the reputation of a scholar, not a warrior. And the Sith Lords were driven by fear. Many thought the Jedi would soon wipe them all out. They were desperate for anything they could use as a weapon against the servants of the light side. Lord Vidiot played upon their fears, convincing those who answered his call to set aside their suspicions of him and of one another to join in a single glorious cause. Once they arrived on Nathema, they quickly fell under Lord Vidiot's control. He dominated their minds, crushed their resistance. He turned them into slaves to his will, forcing them to participate in the most complex ritual of Sith sorcery ever attempted. Calling on the dark side, Lord Vidiot devoured them. He fed on their power, absorbing it into himself, utterly obliterating all traces of his victims. But the ritual is not confined to the doomed Sith Lords. They were but the eye of the storm, the center of a vortex that spread across the entire planet. Every man, woman, and child on Nathema died that day. Every beast, bird, and fish. All the insects and plants. Every living being touched by the Force was consumed. When the ritual ended, Nathema was no longer a world. It was a husk sucked dry. Lord Vidiot sacrificed millions, stealing their life force to make himself immortal. Their deaths also made him stronger than any Sith who had come before, and he ceased to be known as Lord Vidiot. On that day, the Emperor was truly born. Scourge wondered if Nyrus expected him to be horrified by the tale. If so, she was about to be disappointed. The Emperor seized what was his by right, he said. The strong take from the weak. That is our way. Doing it on a scale of millions doesn't change anything. It just proves he deserves to be our emperor. So I used to think, Nyrus said, smiling ghoulishly, and then I saw Nathema for myself. She didn't say anything else for the remainder of the trip, leaving Scourge to wonder in silence why she was so confident he would come around to her side. He felt the first hints of what was waiting for him when the shuttle dropped out of hyperspace. Through the windows of the cockpit, he saw a gray and brown planet looming large before them. Gazing at it, he felt something strange and unsettling, something unnatural. It took him several moments to realize what was wrong, and even when he did, he didn't fully grasp the implications. He wasn't feeling the Force. The sensation was completely alien. The Force was omnipresent. It radiated stronger in certain places and at certain times, and the balance of the dark side and the light constantly shifted, but it was always there in some way, shape, or form. Now, however, he felt nothing. He had become so accustomed to the presence of the Force and in the background that its complete absence was almost overwhelming, leaving him unable to speak. "Prepare yourself," Nyrus said. "We're going down to the surface." The absence grew steadily more pronounced as the shuttle approached and then landed on Nathema. "Come with me," Nyrus commanded, rising up from her seat. Still mute, Scourge followed her down the shuttle's boarding ramp and out onto the world itself. They had touched down at a spaceport in a city, or what used to be a city. The spaceport was surrounded by the buildings, speeder pads, and streets one would expect to see in a planet's major metropolitan center, but it was eerily quiet. The incessant murmur of the crowds and the constant hum of traffic whizzing past on busy streets was missing. There wasn't even any wind, and the air tasted stale in Scourge's mouth. The temperature was neither hot nor cold, but he felt himself starting to shiver. "You feel the chill of the void," Nyrus told him. "The Force is energy. It gives heat to our emotions and our minds, but here it has been stripped away." She led him along the deserted streets as Scourge stared in fascinated horror, trying to grasp the magnitude of what he was witnessing. The buildings seemed to be almost fully intact. There was none of the damage and destruction normally associated with millions of simultaneous deaths. However, there were other signs of what had happened here. Mangled speeders and shuttles were strewn about, the remains of vehicles in motion that had crashed to a halt when their pilots were taken by the ritual. And everywhere Scourge looked there were small piles of clothes, jackets, slacks, and boots that had survived what their owners had not. Normally, these remains would have been picked over by scavengers, but on Nathema, even the vermin and insects were extinct. "Where are the droids?" Scourge asked. He was shocked at the sound of his own voice. It was flat and dull, as if even sound waves had been distorted by the ritual. "The ritual overloaded their circuits," Nyrus explained. Her voice was hollow and washed out as his. The damage was irreparable. Even their memory cores were completely wiped out. Scourge glanced upward and noticed something else unusual. The sun shining down on them from above, a star that had appeared bright orange as they approached the planet, was now a pale shade of brown. In fact, everything around them was either brown or gray, as if the colors had been leached out. Scourge was well acquainted with death. He had no trouble understanding massacres and mass slaughter. Death and destruction unleashed powerful emotions like fear, suffering, and hatred. They fueled the power of the dark side. But what had happened on Nathema was different, and it disturbed him in a deep and profound way. The Emperor had consumed everything. Life, sound, color, even the Force. Nothing remained. This wasn't about conquest or domination or destroying an enemy. All concepts Scourge embraced. Everything on Nathema had simply been snuffed out, extinguished so completely that it ceased to have any meaning or purpose. It was a vacuum of existence, a blight on the natural order. "I've seen enough," he declared. Nyrus nodded, and they turned and made their way back to the ship. Scourge finally understood why Nyrus and the others wanted to take the Emperor down. Destroying your enemies, even destroying a planet, was understandable, but this wasn't simple destruction. It was annihilation, obliteration. The very fabric of the Force had been shredded. Anyone capable of turning an entire planet into a nihilistic abomination had to be completely mad. After seeing the horrors of Nathema, he truly believed the Emperor might declare another war against the Republic, exposing them to the Jedi and leading to the eventual extinction of their species. By the time they reached the shuttle, Scourge's stomach was churning. He had lived his whole life attuned to the Force. Having it stripped away had left him physically ill. The shuttle shook as they took to the air, and he fought against the urge to vomit. As they broke the atmosphere of the cursed world, some semblance of normalcy returned. Scourge felt the Force rushing in to fill the emptiness inside him. He felt its power invigorating him and restoring his strength. At the same time, he also felt something else. The presence of someone strong in the Force. Someone who was neither Nyrus nor him. Nyrus suddenly began punching away at the shuttle's controls, scanning the system for another vessel, and Scourge knew she felt it too. "There," she said, pointing at the readout. "A ship just dropped out of hyperspace in this system." "Could the Emperor have sent someone to follow us?" Scourge asked. "I don't think so," she replied, staring at the screens. "Its signature doesn't match any design I've ever seen before." From her voice, it was clear she was as puzzled as he was. If the ship hadn't followed them here, the odds against it showing up at the same time they were here was astronomical. But Scourge understood the ways of the Force too well to believe in coincidence. There had to be some connection between them and the unexpected visitor. "Looks like a small freighter of some kind," Nyrus muttered. "I don't think they've seen us." Scourge realized they had two options. The first was to make a quick jump to hyperspace in an effort to escape before being noticed. Nyrus decided to take the second option. Reaching out a finger, she activated the shuttle's ion cannon, locked onto the unidentified vessel, and fired. The instant the Ebon Hawk dropped out of hyperspace near Nathema, Revan was overwhelmed by a barrage of mental images. Everything came crashing in on him, the memories he was so desperate to regain, fusing with a trauma he had tried so hard to repress. Caught between the two, he cried out and clutched his head in his hands. For several seconds he didn't move, his conscious will battling with his runaway subconscious. One by one he was able to take the recollections, process them, and store them away, slowly regaining control. He knew with absolute certainty that he had been to this world before. He remembered its deserted city and its lifeless surface. He remembered searching the empty buildings with Malak, looking for archives, records, and astrogation charts that would guide them on the next step of the journey. But most of all, he remembered the horror of a dead planet entirely stripped of the Force. T3 was at his side, beeping with concern. Revan blinked away the last of his fugue state and glanced down at the Hawk's sensors to see what had the little droid so upset. The sensors had picked up another vessel in the system. It was difficult to draw on the Force so close to the ravaged world, and he struggled to get some sense of the passengers on the other ship. By the time his groggy mind registered the threat they posed, it was too late. The ion blast hit the Hawk full bore, shorting out its circuits and engines and leaving them at the mercy of the gravitational field from the planet below. Revan scrambled to steer the ship as it was pulled down into Nathema's atmosphere. Wondering at the chances of surviving a second crash landing in a row, the ion blast had damaged the flight controls and stabilizers, and the ship veered wildly as it plummeted toward the surface. He had no idea if the other ship was following him. His sensors had been knocked out along with everything else. But he knew if he didn't get the engines and repulsors back online, the Ebon Hawk would be smashed to pieces by the fall. T3, he shouted, but the astromech had already sprung into action. T3 had connected himself to the cockpit's main control panel with a 20-centimeter-long slicing tool. Lights on the cockpit dashboard began to flicker and flash as T3 rerouted power from damaged circuits. Through the cockpit window, Revan could see the distant outline of a city far below. The skyscrapers seemed to be growing. Did I get it that time? No. Seemed to be growing rapidly as the Hawk rushed toward them at terminal velocity. Inside the control panel, something crackled and popped. Smoke poured into the cockpit. T3 squealed in alarm, but his warning was drowned out by the sound of the Hawk's engines roaring back to life. Revan pulled back hard on the stick, and the nose of the Hawk grudgingly angled upward. Emergency repulsors screaming. "Brace for impact," he shouted, an instant before they slammed into the edge of one of the massive skyscrapers, sending a shower of permacrete and plasteel tumbling to the empty street below. The Hawk ricocheted off the building and began to spin wildly. Then it slammed into the ground at an awkward angle, skipping along the street like a stone cast across water before finally coming to rest. And we end that on a cliffhanger. That's the end of the chapter. So we will pick up with 16 in the next Star Wars reading. So I'm going to go ahead and end this session. Take a little bit of a break, and then we will... Oh, hey, salty little dude. I just noticed you came in. Thank you. Thank you for the anniversary wishes. So, yeah, I'm going to take a little bit of a break, end this session, come back, and play some Greedfall. So I will see you in a little bit.
My heart is beating, and I know the reasons. Which one is broken and one is free? Because I have seen them all apart. I have no rules about the play. I didn't have anything to say. For your heart, don't take it, you leave me behind. Someone will break. I left you my heart. What did you do? You used it and abused it. You let me all silence. Was my love true? Was it I? You had no answers. Don't know without you. How will I survive? Alone. Was my love true? Was it I? You had no answer.